And our final speaker, Danielle. Sorry about the mix-up. Danielle is Manager of Conservation Research, Learning and Experience at Zealandia Sanctuary in Wellington. She's an ecologist, and is interested in identifying ways that maximise the biodiversity and social benefits from urban settings. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. Cool. Oops. All right. Fantastic. So my talk today, the title of my talk was really inspired by a lecture given by Dame Georgina Mace, in fact, just up the way here at Te Papa. Dame Georgina, in that talk, said explicitly, nature is not a luxury. That argument really is founded on the idea that nature is the foundation of our fresh water. It's the foundation of our fertile soils, our pollinators, and all of these things underpin our economy. So, of course, nature is essential, and that therefore makes it not a luxury. We also know that nature is fundamental for our health and our well-being. And there's a huge range of literature which I've been deeply embedded in for the last few years. But just some of the benefits that we get from nature, directly or indirectly, include reduction in mental fatigue and stress, reductions in blood pressure, cardiovascular disease. It reduces mortality across some of these areas as well. We also see improvements in cognitive function, social well-being, physical activity. So there's a huge range of ways that we gain benefits from nature. So this, of course, highlights nature should not be a luxury. However, there's a heck of a lot of evidence that we currently treat it like one. So in this talk, I'm just going to step through a bit of that evidence and then talk about some of my ideas at the end for how we overcome this issue. So, of course, for the luxury of exploring this topic in this talk, one of the first things I did was just type nature into Google. Now, some of the images that come up are things like we see up here. So we see these incredible scenes, natural environments, beautiful waterfalls with turquoise lakes, mountains with reflecting lakes in front of them, and beautiful road shots with those amber leaves that fall off trees in the northern hemisphere. Anyway, so when I look at these as an ecologist, I've had the fortune to travel to a lot of incredible places in my life, but these to me look somewhat unobtainable. They're places that I don't necessarily get to on a day-to-day basis. So nature is not something that happens in my backyard, according to this lovely Google search, which is, of course, ranked based on hits, based on keywords. And to take that a step further, when I search for holiday, I get these lovely pictures of half-naked, bikini-clad women who visit the gym a lot more often than me, drinking margaritas and splashing through beautiful landscapes. But again, I think this implies that nature is something luxurious, somewhere that we experience luxury. And I think that for me is perhaps a bit of a detriment to our conservation mission. Now, I think we also see this concept, not just in conservation, where perhaps conservation is something that happens on offshore islands or in national parks, but we see it in cities where we commonly work around this construct of planning green spaces into our neighbourhoods. So we put in a green space in a certain spatial location. Of course, this is Central Park, one of those more famous areas, but we do this in almost every city in the world. Again, nature is something that happens down the road in another place that's not necessarily my backyard. So I've just skimmed over a little bit of the evidence there that nature is not necessarily something that I have immediate and direct access to. But I'm going to get further now into the, hopefully is this working all right? Yeah, cool. So I'm going to take that a step further now to talking about luxury in the sense that it's not accessible to everyone. So there's a fair body of evidence now that there are a lot of socioeconomic biases in who can access nature and who can engage with it and who does in fact engage with it. So this is the outcomes of a little study that actually happened here in Wellington in Lower Hutt. It found that for every 1% of dense vegetation around the home value increased by $400. Now that might not seem like a lot, but once you start to look at the effects of botanic gardens, of places like Zealandia, that effect is significant. The other thing with this study is it focused on census mesh blocks, which are quite big. So that's an average result. Now, if you look at green spaces, the biggest effect is quite close by, so within 100 to 200 metres on house values. Now, what this does is it effectively pushes out having a green space near the home for a lot of people. It makes living near a green space something a bit luxurious, something that I want to buy, but I can't necessarily afford. So for me, I consider that a particular problem, given all of those services and benefits that we talked about earlier. In fact, some of our most vulnerable people can't access these health-promoting landscapes. This is just a little bit of evidence from some of my own research. Most of my research is based in Australia at this point, but I'm working on remedying that at the moment. This is a nice little figure which just shows differences in backyard vegetation across a socioeconomic spectrum. So looking at some of our lowest socioeconomic, most disadvantaged groups, we see much lower tree cover in backyards than in some of the higher socioeconomic groups. And of course, there's a range of reasons that drive a pattern like this. For example, preferences, of course, come into play. We've got different groups with different values, as Edie so nicely summarised earlier. But also there's difference, for example, in this group, a lot of these people rent and perhaps don't want to invest in that kind of a way in their own backyard. So there's a range of drivers for this, but we see a number of outcomes that have been emerging in the literature, and Claire Freeman and Jolanda van Heesek did some lovely research down in Dunedin that showed that kids in some of these lower socioeconomic brackets tend to have smaller home ranges and access a lower diversity of nature. I hope I got that roughly right. Somewhat, okay. Maybe not exactly on the point there, but in essence, we do see these kinds of trends in a lot of places, in a lot of environments across the world. So I think where I'm heading with all of this is that, great, okay, nature shouldn't be a luxury. But unfortunately, we currently treat it like one. Underpin the economy, a lot of the services that we get, but it's not necessarily accessible to all, and it's often something we relegate into a small portion of our lives. And to be a little bit self-critical here, I think some of my own research perpetuates this a bit, because I've done a lot of work exploring the nature dose concept. So that's the idea that you can get out into green space for 30 minutes a week and really get those health and wellbeing benefits. And while I think that kind of research is necessary at the moment to help us take the next step to getting it into people's lives, it does again compartmentalise it into just a portion of our lives. Whereas I feel that it probably should be integrated into a lot more aspects of our life. So this is a biological heritage conference, so why am I giving this talk here? I think there's an assumption that, to some extent untested at this point, there's an assumption that we don't necessarily value what we don't experience or what we don't understand. And perhaps, just perhaps, this trend is leading to this sort of result, which is environment ranking about 12th in this list of priorities in the US election last year. It's a scary trend that's happening at a lot of places across the world. So we need this license to operate that we've heard about today. We need this engagement, at least to some extent, unless we can connect through these other values like we heard in some other presentations. But it is important to have that voting base who do consider the environment is fundamental to our economy, is fundamental to our healthcare, etc. And I think by reframing this, by making something, by creating nature, or turning nature into something that we experience as part of our everyday lives, we could perhaps get to that point. So from my perspective, I think there's a range of ways we can take this a step further. Of course, I talked a little bit about urban planning. We create spaces for nature in our urban landscape. I think perhaps we need to get a bit more proactive in some instances, and some cities do this really well, but not just looking at green spaces as those patches on the landscape, but looking at our full suite of natural resources or possibilities for creating natural resources and landscapes. This includes roadside reserves, areas alongside train tracks, places that aren't necessarily places that we're currently using for biodiversity. There's a lot of opportunity there. I'm also really interested in rethinking what a park looks like. If these kinds of parks, what I might term Europarks, we've got a lawn and we've got nice trees, if they're not attracting the full demographic of people who might engage with these sorts of spaces, maybe we're designing them the wrong way. We're not listening to the needs of those communities. So this concept's the basis of some work that I've been doing with Jacqueline McIntosh, who's specifically looking at whether we can create a different kind of park, which might be, for example, more attractive to Māori or Pacifica, or demographics that are different to mine. Now, finally, I think, and from Zealandia's perspective, we have huge opportunity to target that next generation. And of course, I hope to not be working in 35 years or so when predator-free 2050 comes around. These kids will be. These kids are taking up that mantle. It's a fantastic program where kids come to Zealandia and they get an amazing education experience, and then we follow up with some outreach. So it's not just about visiting a sanctuary where nature happens, but it's about learning about how you can create that nature in your backyard. So it's a really powerful program that we're rolling out. We also connect with young people who ordinarily wouldn't be able to access those educational experiences. So just to sum up, we talked a little bit about some of the evidence that suggests, in fact, we're treating nature as luxury. There's a huge range of evidence that falls into that bracket at the moment. And then we talked about a few solutions on the way. But I'll leave it at that.